March 19th, 2025. Just recently, the state of Arizona carried out the execution of Aaron Gunches. Now, if you just glance at the headlines, you probably saw it as the closing chapter of a, standard true crime story. Bad guy does a bad thing, goes to prison, eventually pays the ultimate price. Simple, right? But we've been digging through a mountain of records, court transcripts, investigative reports, administrative reviews, and I have to tell you, there's nothing simple about this.
Not even close, no. I mean, it's definitely a crime story, but it's also a story about a massive administrative breakdown. It's a case study in what some psychologists call suicide by jury. And honestly, it's a terrifying look at what happens when the machinery of the justice system just starts to rust and fall apart in real time.
That's what jumped out at me.
Yeah.
We aren't just talking about a murder from 2002. We're talking about a 22-year saga where you have a killer who is practically begging to die, a victim's family who just wants it to be over, and a state government that for a long time couldn't figure out how to do it without checking Wikipedia.
That is unfortunately not an exaggeration. We'll get to the Wikipedia part, which is it's mind-blowing. But you're right. This case creates this bizarre triangle of conflicting motivations. You have the perpetrator, Aaron Gunches, sort of pulling the strings from behind bars, this state grappling with broken protocols and political standoffs, and stuck in the middle is the memory of the victim, Ted Price.
And I think we need to anchor ourselves there first. Before we get into the legal circus and the, botched protocols, we need to know who Ted Price was. Because in all the noise about the killer, the victim so often becomes a footnote. What do we know about him?
Ted Price was 40 years old, originally from Utah. He was training to be a radiology technician, and by all accounts, he was a gentle soul. One of the friends interviewed in the background material described him as the kind of guy who never met a cat he didn't like.
Which is such a specific, endearing detail. It paints a picture of someone who wasn't looking for trouble.
Exactly. He wasn't part of a gang. He wasn't involved in the drug trade personally. He was a caretaker. And that instinct is actually what put him in danger. He had been in a relationship with a woman named Catherine Letcher for about 10 years. They had split, but Ted had helped raise her 2 kids, Brittany and Justin. I mean, he changed their diapers, helped with homework. He was their dad in every way that mattered.
So even after the breakup, he felt responsible for that.
He did. So in November 2002, Ted travels to Mesa, Arizona. He's in a transition period waiting for student housing, and he plans to crash on his ex-girlfriend's couch. He's expecting the domestic environment he used to know.
But that is definitely not what he found.
No. He walked into a nightmare. Catherine's apartment had become a flop house. It was, a revolving door for strangers and drug users. The stability was just gone.
Imagine that whiplash. You're an aspiring medical professional, you walk in expecting to see your stepkids, and instead you're in a drug den. Why did he stay?
Because of the kids.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy here. The breaking point came when Ted witnessed Catherine doing methamphetamine with her teenage daughter.
With her daughter.
Yes. And Ted did what any decent parent would do. He drew a line in the sand. He told Catherine that if she didn't stop, he was calling Child Protective Services. He was going to save those kids.
He took a moral stand in a room full of people who had lost their moral compass.
Precisely. And that threat calling the authorities is what got him killed. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a hit ordered to silence a whistleblower. Catherine attacked him first. She slammed a heavy landline telephone into his head.
Which creates chaos, disorients him.
Right. And while he's dazed, she calls in her fixer, Aaron Gunches. He was her drug dealer, and his day job, if you can call it that, was fabricating glass pipes for smoking meth.
So Gunches shows up, and this is where the details get just incredibly cruel. It wasn't enough to just hurt Ted. The reports mention something about a guitar.
This is one of those details that shows you the malice involved. Gunches arrives, sees Ted dazed on the floor. He decides to take them out to the desert. But before they leave, Gunches grabs Ted's guitar and hands it to Catherine's son, Justin. He tells the boy it's a gift because Ted won't be needing it anymore.
That's just psychological torture. He's telling the kid, I'm going to kill your father figure right to his face.
It's a power play. It's about dominance. They load Ted into a car, and get this, the driver is a 17-year-old girl named Jennifer Garcia, a friend of the daughter, who is basically forced to drive them. They head out to the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Reservation.
And this is where the execution happens.
Gunches shoots Ted 4 times, 3 to the chest, 1 to the head. It was calculated. And the behavior afterward is just as chilling. On the drive back, Gunches is reportedly calm, even trying to flirt with the teenage driver, stroking her hair. He gets back to the apartment and just goes to sleep.
Like it was just a Tuesday. Meanwhile, Ted is left in the desert.
for nearly a month. When they finally found his body, the decomposition was so bad they had to identify him by the serial number on his hip replacement.
So Gunches goes on the run. And I want to pause here because later on, we're going to talk about how Gunches wanted the death penalty, how he was a volunteer. But his actions in January 2003, when he was caught, paint a very different picture. He didn't surrender.
Far from it. This is crucial for understanding his psychology. He gets pulled over near the California border for a burnt-out taillight, a routine stop. But Gunches knows the game is up. He comes out shooting.
And the survival of the officer, Robert Flannery, is just miraculous.
It's one for the history books. Gunches shoots him twice. One hits the Kevlar vest, knocking the wind out of him. The second bullet, it hits the officer's wristwatch.
His watch.
A literal inch from entering his wrist and traveling up his arm or into his torso. The watch shattered, but it stopped the bullet.
That is unbelievable luck.
It is. Gunches then leads them on a high-speed chase, hits tire spikes, crashes into the desert, and tries to hide in a haystack. The report says he was flushed out like a rat from its nest.
Okay, so here's the contradiction I can't wrap my head around. He fights like a demon to escape, he shoots a cop, he hides in a haystack, but as soon as he gets to court, his strategy completely flips. He essentially fires his lawyers and says, "Kill me." Why?
It does seem contradictory, but it's actually two sides of the same coin. Control. When he was on the run, he was trying to control his freedom. Once he was in a cage, he realized he had lost that freedom. So the only power move left was to control his own death. This is what we call suicide by jury.
So by waiving his appeals and refusing a defense, he's basically taking the power away from the prosecutor.
Exactly. He's telling the court, you aren't punishing me, I'm using you as a tool. He refused to present any mitigation evidence. Usually, in a death penalty case, your lawyers will bring up your childhood trauma, mental illness, drug abuse, anything to try and get you life in prison instead of death. Gunches blocked all of that. In his closing arguments, he literally looked at the jury and said, do what you're going to do.
He's daring them.
He is, and he's not alone in this. Since 1976, there have been about 165 of these volunteers in the youth justice system. And when you look at the data, 87% of them suffer from severe mental illness, PTSD, or substance abuse. It raises this massive ethical question. Is the legal system serving justice, or is it basically functioning as a state-sponsored suicide clinic for mentally unstable individuals?
That's a heavy question. And in Gunch's case, the system was so messy that he actually had to ask for the death penalty twice, right?
That's right. His first death sentence was vacated. The Arizona Supreme Court ruled that the murder didn't meet the specific legal definition of cruel and heinous because Ted Price was dazed and likely died quickly.
Wait, I have to stop you. He kidnapped him, taunted his kid, and shot him 4 times. How is that not cruel and heinous?
It's a very specific legal term about suffering. Since Ted was likely unconscious or dazed from the phone hit, the court argued he didn't suffer prolonged physical torture before death, so they sent it back for resentencing. And Gunches, being Gunches, just stood up and demanded the death penalty again, and he got it.
So now we enter the wait. He spends over 20 years on death row. And this is where the story shifts from the crime to the administrative chaos. Because while Gunches is sitting there writing letters to the Attorney General saying, hurry up, the state of Arizona is apparently falling apart.
Falling apart is putting it mildly. You have to understand the context. In 2014, Arizona botched the execution of a man named Joseph Wood. It was supposed to take 10 minutes. Instead, he gasped and snorted on the table for nearly 2 hours. It was a disaster.
2 hours?
Yes. So the state paused everything to review protocols. Fast forward to late 2022, Gunches asks for an execution warrant, but then the government flips. You get a new Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, and a new Attorney General, Chris Mays. They come in and say, whoa, this system is broken. We're pausing everything.
And this is when the findings from Judge Duncan came out. You mentioned earlier that they were checking Wikipedia. I need you to explain that. Why on earth would a government agency responsible for life and death be looking up drug dosages on Wikipedia?
It sounds like a bad joke, but it boils down to a global blockade. Over the last decade, major pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer and others, have refused to sell their drugs to prisons for use in executions. They don't want their life-saving medicine used to kill people. It's bad PR, and it goes against their corporate ethics.
So the state can't just go to the pharmacy and buy the official lethal injection drugs.
Exactly. They were cut off. So the Department of Corrections started improvising. They were trying to compound their own mixtures, essentially making homebrewed lethal drugs. But because there is no medical manual for how to improvise an execution, the staff was left grasping for information. Judge Duncan's review found they were literally Googling chemical properties and checking Wikipedia to figure out how to do it.
That is terrifying. Regardless of where you stand on the death penalty,
Yeah.
whether you're for it or against it, the idea that the people carrying it out are winging it based on internet searches is, it destroys the legitimacy of the whole thing.
It does, and it got shadier. The review found there were secret cash payments. We're talking $20,000 in cash handed to prison officials.
Cash, like in an envelope.
Off the books. Likely to buy the raw materials for these drugs from suppliers who didn't want a paper trail. It creates a picture of a state government acting more like a cartel than a justice system. Judge Duncan concluded the protocols were fundamentally unreliable.
So Gunches sees all this news, right? And the guy who wanted to die suddenly gets cold feet.
He withdraws his request. He sends reports that recent executions were amounting to torture. It's this weird moment where the volunteer says, I want to die, but I don't want you to botch it.
Which, honestly, is a fair point given the Joseph Wood case.
Yeah.
But eventually the politics settle. Governor Hobbs says the internal review is done and executions can resume in 2025. Gunches immediately pivots back to kill me now. He even requested a Valentine's Day execution.
He did. He has a flair for the dramatic. He didn't get Valentine's Day, but he got March 19th, 2025.
Let's talk about that day. The final act. We have the minute-by-minute details.
It was at the Florence prison. 18 witnesses, including Attorney General Mays and Ted Price's sister, Karen. Gunches seemed determined to show zero remorse.
And he had quite the last meal.
A feast. A double Western bacon cheeseburger, gyros, onion rings, baklava. He indulged himself completely while the family of the man he killed sat just feet away, waiting for closure.
Did he say anything to them?
No. He refused to even look at them. When the warden asked for last words, Gunches just shook his head. But, and this is classic Gunches, the witnesses reported that while they were prepping him, his only spoken words were, "What's the holdup?"
Impatient to the end, still trying to control the clock.
Exactly.
Now, despite the state saying everything went according to plan, there's still controversy about how he died. The official line is that it was peaceful. But a witness, Dale Bache, saw something else.
Dale Bache is a legal expert who has seen many of these. He noted that Gunches' breathing was weird. He suggested it looked like pulmonary edema.
Can you break that down? What is pulmonary edema in this context?
In plain English, it's flash drowning. The drugs used, specifically the pentobarbital, can sometimes cause fluid to rapidly fill the lungs.
But he looked peaceful.
That's the horror of it. The inmate is often sedated or paralyzed, so they can't thrash around or scream. But internally, if that fluid builds up, they are essentially drowning in their own body. They feel the sensation of waterboarding, but to the witnesses behind the glass, they just look like they're sleeping. Bache's account suggests that even with the new protocols, the state might still be torturing people. They're just better at hiding it now.
He was pronounced dead at 10:33 a.m.
And that brings us to the aftermath we have to ask. Was justice served? Karen Price, Ted's sister, released a statement. She said she was relieved it was over, but she made a really poignant point. She said Ted was killed for doing the right thing.
And that sticks with you. Ted died because he tried to protect kids. But speaking of the kids and the family, there is a massive loose end here that we haven't touched on enough. Catherine Letcher.
The ex-girlfriend.
Yeah. She hit Ted with the phone. She created the danger. She called Gunches to handle it. Was she ever charged?
No.
Nothing. Not accessory to murder, not conspiracy.
No, keep stuck. She was never charged in connection with the murder.
That is, I don't even have a word for it, infuriating. You have a guy executed 22 years later, and the person who made the phone call that started it all is just walking free.
It highlights the massive gap between moral responsibility and legal proof. She set the dominoes in motion, but Gunches was the one who pulled the trigger. And the tragedy ripples out. Think about those kids, Brittany and Justin. They lost their father figure, Ted. They watched their mother descend into addiction. They lived with the knowledge of what happened. Brittany released a statement saying the pain of reliving this for over 20 years has been exhausting.
It brings us back to the idea of closure. We always use that word closure, but is this closure?
I don't think so. I think closure is a myth in cases like this. It's just the end of the legal noise. The loss is still there. And really, if we look at the big picture, did the system work? Gunches manipulated the timeline for 2 decades. He forced the family to come to hearings when he wanted. He delayed things when he wanted. In a way, he used the state of Arizona to commit suicide on his own terms.
That's the disturbing takeaway. We pay for a justice system to deliver justice for victims. But in this case, It feels like the system was just a tool for the killer.
And a broken tool at that.
So where does that leave us? Gunches is gone. The headlines say, "Justice served."
But the machinery underneath is still a mess. The drug shortages haven't gone away. The questions about suicide by jury haven't been answered. And the trauma for families, like the Prices, doesn't just vanish when the needle goes in. Gunches is gone. But the chaos that surrounded his case is something we're going to be dealing with for a long time.
A sobering thought to end on? It's a case that forces you to look past the crime and punishment headline and see the broken gears turning underneath.
Absolutely.
Well, that is a lot to process. Thank you for walking us through the layers of this, because it's definitely not just black and white.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone listening. This was a heavy deep dive, but an important one. We'll be back soon with another topic. Take care of yourselves out there.